Good afternoon, everybody. Given recent discussions on my channel, I thought it was time we looked at the Hermit more fully. And what I've done here is a synthesis from the various books, from Meditations on the Tarot, from the Solar Way, Tarot Majors, and Holy Book of Thoth. I'll get right to it because I've got quite a few pages here to read from my notes. I'm going to begin with the Mebes as the one who instigated the teachings of the school for the others. So, with no further ado, the Hermit, the veiled lamp, prudence, the Hebrew letter Tet, the number 9, Leo, initiation on all 3 planes, Lux Occulta. Now Mebes, as those of you who've read him will know, looks at mathematical deconstructions of the numbers of the cards. So in the case of the 9, we begin with 9 equals 1 plus 8, where an individual balanced unit seeks to manifest in the environment according to the law. If the plane of manifestation is that of the archetype, the human will find there the image of the protective genii who help him discover his own higher being, hence the name Protector, also given to this Arcanum. If sought on the plane of man, manifestation will entail self-understanding, astrally and through soul harmonization. This evolutionary work is often called self-initiation, and the Protector is found within the self, conferring the title of initiate. If the desired plane of manifestation is nature, the physical, the being learns to face the god of materialists, which is chance, and to orient the self in life through the theory of probability that often dictates various degrees of prudence. If we invert that deconstruction to 9 equals 8 plus 1, we see how legality will weigh upon and limit a crystallized but healthy personality, which is then unable to circumvent prudently the demands of his environment through internal isolation and to rise above the dictates of that environment. Nine equals 2 plus 7. The sum of science and the victor, the one who passed through the first 7 metaphysical arcana, the chariot, if you remember. The science is both female, passive, receptive, divinatio, with the ability to see in the archetype man and nature. And it also has a male active side, which has the ability to own the astral, that is, to direct and apply the energy of personality in the forms of magnetism, telepathy, and so on. If the victor voluntarily renounces his activity and receptivity in the field for the safety of his personality, we will arrive at the deconstruction 9 equals 7 plus 2. 9 also equals 3 plus 6, where metaphysics is ahead of the choice of the path, metaphysics being 3, the choice of the path 6, and determines it. Other factors can still affect this choice, such as impulsiveness or superstitions. It's worth bearing in mind, if we attain ascendancy over somebody who is our mental, astral, and physical equal, it's almost always due to their superstitions, prejudices, or other conditioning. The inverse, 9 equals 6 plus 3, means that the choice of path determines the metaphysics, and the justification for that choice has to be found further down the line. 9 equals 4 plus 5 arises from the plane of 4 elements to the astral plane. And the basic premise of this section is don't try astral work unless conditions are suitable. 9 also equals 5 plus 4. A formula intelligently applicable only in exceptional circumstances, that at the individual will, the influence of the elements and sometimes in opposition to them is given primacy. And he mentions the example of to activate the Mars of one's astral, even at great cost to vital forces or material resources, so emergency measures. In this Arcanum, we also have the symmetric triple D construction 9 equals 3 plus 3 plus 3, which determines the hierarchical steps of the initiation itself. 3 cycles with 3 degrees, which Mebes describes at some length. I won't go into it in as much length. I'm obviously condensing this considerably. The physical plane is the lower, broadly speaking described as the physical. Then comes the astral plane initiation, and then the 3rd degree of universal love through ethical hermeticism. Each stage has 3 stages. All stages can be achieved without the presence of an incarnate initiator. However, in the 2nd degree, the initiate must learn to exteriorize in the astrosome in order to enter into communication with the teacher or teachers who may or may not be incarnate. Mebes speaks also of the student's traditional Rosicrucian astral trial, accompanied by those who went before him, which should occur no later than the gap between the 3rd highest degree of the physical and the 1st degree of the astral. Now the higher cycle, the mental or the metaphysical, is characterised as a simple attachment of a human being to that stream of ideas, the affinity for which is naturally determined by the type of its monad. The collective universal man accepts into his body a cell that belongs to him from the beginning of eternity, cleansed of the contamination of the fall, and returning to its place with a reserve of acquired wisdom, all made possible by a process of the emanations of the archetype, which brought about the principle of the universal collective man in its purity. At this initiation, a person is exteriorized in his mental body, the thinly astralized shell of his spiritual monad. The Rosicrucian reintegration is placed between the higher degrees of the astral cycle and the lower mental level. Reintegrated brothers of the Rose Cross refers to the elementaries which may have retained the middle astral shell but can separate from it just like embodied people can exteriorize in the astral body. The reintegrated Rosicrucian seems to temporarily lull the middle astrosome, that is, voluntarily renounce energetic manifestations, limiting activity to mental manifestations peculiar to the Adam cell just before the fall. Just as during exteriorization we voluntarily renounce sensory perceptions in order to cast off slavery from time and space. Reintegrated Rosicrucians can use mental exteriorization for borrowing forms of the middle astral to create evolutionary astral cliches outside the scope of their usual activities in the middle astral. An embodied person can be mentally initiated. Again, I'm condensing greatly Mebes' teaching here. This broadly takes the form of ecstasy. And again, Mebes explains this further, adding that this is a short and difficult method to carry the minced crumbs of a reintegrating mentality into our physical world that are not distorted in essence. People who achieve this are masters, recognized by others as messengers of the higher plane, who do not live for themselves but for everyone, thereby mentally, figuratively removing the physical body and lower astral subplanes unnecessary to reintegrated brothers of the Rose Cross. The mental cycle takes place by itself in its own time. It's not about wanting it or accepting it. The process does not have a personal character. The desire and passion disappear, yielding the work of one of the cells of the universal collective man, completing the Tikkun Olam. This is in contrast to the astral initiation, where the initiate of the pentagram has the right not only to want, but to demand initiation. The will of the initiator must here submit to the logic of the initiate. Mebes then speaks further about the teacher-initiate relationship in the physical and highlights how difficult increasingly it is to find teachers in this world. He does envisage a scenario which is understandable in the Bolshevik period, when all freedom of thought and teaching was obliterated after a period of flourishing during the Silver Age. And he sort of speculates that if the complete destruction of occult teaching was to occur, the work of initiates would become greatly complicated. They'd have to find new methods of preparing students, elementary symbols, different stages, different mechanisms of initiation. However, if, as I believe has happened in the end, thanks to in no small part their own efforts to save the teachings, the great chain of tradition remains unbroken. Even if only in the physical cycle, there will always be a group of guardians of tradition, archival watchmen, faithful chroniclers of the history of esotericism, always observing the system of connections between the external Masonic and esoteric manifestations of mankind. And one of the ways we've been able to maintain this unbroken chain is through the Martinist school. Saint Martin detailed 4 categories of men: men of the torrent, weak-willed, poorly individualised, fashion-conscious, the herd, that is; men of desire, seekers of absolute truth, working on self-improvement, contemplation of nature, study of tradition, etc. New men, who reach a certain astral degree of initiation and therefore are not subject to the same mistakes as the man of aspiration, to not judge himself or his neighbour. Spirit men, totally beyond the attraction of the physical plane, liberated from the slavery of the soul sphere, who have reached full awareness in the sphere of emanations. And now he returns to another triple deconstruction where 9 equals 2 plus 3 plus 4. Polarity, here the 2, is linked with attraction. The powerful aspiration of a man of desire, his ardent prayer, magnetizes the environment, and from this he will attract to himself the individualized elements which may facilitate his initiation. Some of these elements will be superior, others lower and accessible through vampirism. 3 here is the balanced ternary, the androgyne, which can be manifested both in the active field and the passive, indicating the need for condensation of all that's been assimilated. 4 is the rota, the constructive work of the adept, who is training his personality, evolving, journeying to spread the light. 4 is an allusion to the emanation plane of magical development of the future instructor. The light of Hermes is its lamp, his lamp. Do not despise the profane physical work. Study the astral plane with assiduity and elevate oneself by the mental to the transcendent level. You are a tri-plane being. Study all 3 planes. The mantle of Apollonius of Tyana, symbol of the self-determination of the monad on the mental plane, self-knowledge on the astral, solitude on the physical, being aware of one's role as a cell in the mental organism of the universal collective man, astral self-knowledge. And by the staff he feels his way through the resolving of binaries. 9 stages, Mebes suggests, facilitate self-initiation. One must overcome physical cowardice, overcome physical indecision, overcome regrets about what has been done and what cannot be changed, fight as much as possible against superstitions, fight as much as possible against prejudice, fight to the maximum with the conditions, attain health and the external environment in good order. Realise also the astral order, both in itself, harmony of soul, and outside, that is, acquire empirical knowledge of the entities of the astral plane and learn how to classify them properly. Perform a mental order, that is, achieve purity, clarity and certainty in your world view, but also the full awareness of its emanation from the archetype. And the pentacle of this arcanum is really 9 equals 3 plus 6. later, Tomberg, and we're going to get into his teaching, will point to the inversion of the tetragrammaton as putting the principle of matter above that of all other principles, the formula of cunning, the ruse of the serpent, the scientific method, as being kind of the root of black magic and counter-initiation. Now, Shmakov, as he says, the principle of the triple triad, Arcanum IX, is the end of the third turner of the arcana. The first turner being the magician, the high priestess and the empress, the second turner being the emperor, the pope and the lovers, and the third one being the chariot, justice and the hermit. So this is the end of the third turner. Deity is infinite and the world is infinite. These two equal but opposite infinities determine the state of prior. The first two turners are a complete system. Whilst the second turner considers the world as a complex of particulars, which is the image and likeness of the deity in relation to the entire cosmos, the third reveals the same doctrine in relation to a particular. The second turner applies the doctrine to the macrocosm, and the third to the microcosm. The tetragrammaton cycle has full force in the third turner. When considering the dilemma of the first and second turners, the difference between the second and the third, as the value of the lowest order, falls altogether. The second and third merge into one, and in this form the triad of the first three turners results in a six-pointed star, the hexagram. The doctrine of the triple triad. The absolute triad asserts itself in three aspects of being: in being one and indivisible, the synthesis of all potencies, in the unity of being the totality of his objectified potencies, enamelled outside the integral unity as a single quasi-independent aspect, and in being in each of its separate aspects. Each state of the triad is known in the turner, and these three particular turners, joined together, reveal the substance of the triad in a perfect way for human consciousness. The first 9 arcana, a coherent and closed whole, a cycle which exhausts the teaching of world creativity as a self-affirmation of substance. Each arcanum on its own is only an aspect of the whole. They are all connected by unity in their synthesis and genesis. We see this idea in the cosmogonic gods of Egypt, which formed a theoretical whole of 9 deities, the host or cycle of gods. The 9 gods, the Ennead worshipped at Heliopolis, formed a tribunal in the Osiris myth: Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Nephthys and Set. They were to decide whether Set or Horus should rule. And we're going to just recall again the culminations of each 3 ternary. Arcanum 3, divine nature inherent in a single homogeneous cosmic spirit. Arcanum 6, heavenly nature inherent in the cosmic created spirit, the Eden of the universal family of individual monads. Arcanum 9 reveals the laws of earthly nature, life in which is the lot of the fallen Adam. Earthly nature is confirmed by the consciousness of the fallen monad of its separateness as a prototype of individuality. The doctrine of individuality in its cognition is the problem of this arcanum. And he looks a little bit at the birth of loneliness, the state of the hermit, in which individuality begins to manifest in a person in a conscious way. And a person begins to see himself as having individual value, not just one of the herd. When passing from one state to another, there is a dead state where a person finally loses touch with everything once close to him, before new connections have formed. Thus, at the first glimpse of spiritual consciousness, a person can seem lost and loneliness reaches a climax. The person must not freeze in this state, but must press on. The vast majority of people, after their first flash of consciousness, stop at this point, but true individuals go further towards the seeming abyss, into the dark night of the soul. Gradually you will find support and light within yourself, or draw light from darkness. You must strive to both study and understand this experience, to know yourself and your individuality through the totalities and tonalities of that experience. The consciousness of one's utter poverty inaugurates a new era in the soul of man. He loses one thing but creates something new, something much more powerful in a way unknown to himself. Man as a microcosm contains in his being the prototype of the highest cosmic antinomy, the binary of the principles of spirit and environment. True life is true self-consciousness, self-knowledge of one's divine dignity. Now, that was a very short précis of Shmakov's teaching, which is extremely metaphysical and Kabbalistic. And we can perhaps remind ourselves that the Hermit position on the tree of life is with Yesod on the middle pillar. In some occult schools, this is also seen as analogous with the Holy Spirit. So moving into Nina Roudnikova, just a little bit of a bridge. We will remind ourselves that the Hermit, the 9th Arcanum, has its analogue in the Decad with the 19. The 19th being the sun, the great work itself. The solar consciousness is the conductor of the divine spiritual force on earth. It brings forth an adept who is truly self-aware. To become sons of the sun in cultural work and to transform the psychic atmosphere of the earth means to create the great work. Given the state humanity is in, the implementation of solar work is very difficult. The aura of the planet is poisoned by low-quality earthly emanations and deeds. Therefore, the higher forces have established a special spiritual order on earth, according to which the great solar work is carried out thanks to the participation of the great teachers of humanity and the White Brotherhood. They reside in a special spatial zone of the planet, the energy centre of the earth, and from this centre they send out their messengers and collaborators to help all peoples. In the solar way, the astral light is emphasised, and the 9th principle is a synthesis of all the previous principles. The realisation of the divine spiritual principles of love and life and the creative force resulting from them, its laws and applications, is wisdom. Wisdom is seen as the legitimate heritage of humanity, something we must remember, regain, as we attempt to reintegrate our consciousness with that of the divine and the path of our return to the spiritual source. This is the awakening of our immortal soul, finding God within. The path is difficult. It involves tearing us from the objects of our desires, our habits and attachments, cultivating a new creative vision and inner spiritual core, the philosopher's gold. The 9th principle is illustrated in the Emerald Tablet, and this forms the mainstay of her teaching on this Arcanum. I won't go into it all, but she does say at the beginning, truly without falsehood, reliably and to the highest degree truthfully. It is wrong recognition of the gross and the subtle that all the tragic mistakes and false paths of humanity are based. All unselfish creative impulses in the name of achieving truth and service are for the greater good. These belong to the subtle and spiritual, however primitive these impulses might be. Whereas even the most refined self-interest and selfishness should be attributed to gross material instincts, and again, when she, in her own teaching on the resolving of binaries, Nina Roudnikova says that basically it's false binaries which have created all the confusion in the world, and that understanding which binaries, which are really binary polar forces, is the art of living. You have to know what the true opposing principle is, and it's nailing the opposite to a false principle that gives rise to the realm of delusion, falsehood. In the process of guiding people, nations and students, one must exercise great caution. The basis of wide guidance on the path of initiation is to be prudent and careful and cautious. Give to everyone according to his measure. An overloaded consciousness can be very harmful and destructive to the subtle vehicles. That is why initiation is esoteric and occult and takes time. The ninth principle symbolises the riddle of the Sphinx, the great secret, the solution of which frees consciousness from the formal world. I'll read what she says about this, I think. To make the task easier, let's say that the upper triangle, envisage this on the Tree of Life, Magician, High Priestess, Empress. Let's say the upper triangle symbolises the three great spiritual principles reflected by the principles of the all-knowing giver mind, the all-bliss giver heart, and the giver of all existence, expanded by the spiritual will of consciousness. The same triangle symbolises the mystery of the union of love and life into a creative force, and it also speaks of the divine origin of man. Of the elements it refers to air, breath. The six-pointed star of the middle part, again we're on the Tree of Life here, so Emperor, Pope, Lovers, Chariot, Justice, Hermit, symbolises the mental psychic world. And the triangle turned upside down, the inverted reflection of the spiritual triangle is symbolised water and depicts the flow of psychic forces. The triangle with the top up, the triangle of thought creation, mental construction, is symbolised by fire. The lower part of the symbol captures in the circle of cosmic life the square of the great quaternary law of universal dynamics, the law of causality, that is, the square of nature. The cross behind the centre, a hidden quadrangle, symbolises the path of humanity against nature, the expediency of which everyone must find and establish in himself as the hidden centre of the cross. Now to meditations on the tarot. For Tomberg, this Arcanum, that of the Sadiq, the righteous hermit, the righteous solitary man, is very special to him. He epitomises the spiritual post of hermit, as we might say Mebes does the magician, Nina High Priestess, Shmakov the fool. Tomberg even says he is pleased to have arrived at the ninth Arcanum, and that the path to get there was hard and the gate narrow. The venerable hermit, he says, was master of his most intimate and cherished dreams of youth, and is still the master of dreams for all the youth who seek that narrow gate. As Nina already showed us, Tomberg sets out in this Arcanum to show how the Emerald Tablet, Hermes, is the great teacher of the hermit, who not only represents the wise and good Father in heaven, but also the method and essence of Hermeticism, founded on three methods of knowledge: a priori knowledge of intelligence, the lamp; harmony of all by analogy, the mantle; and authentic immediate experience, the staff. Hermeticism itself is a threefold synthesis of three antinomies: idealism, realism, nominalism, and faith empirical science. Now he goes on to attempt this Hermetic resolution, which takes many, many pages. I've not replicated these in full. But at a couple of points in this text, at one place he asks which is right, realism with its idol the thing prior to thought and its Mazdian dualism of darkness and light, good and evil, or idealism with its idol of the human intellect. Let us not prostrate ourselves before either the world or the intellect, but in adoration of the common source of both the world and the intellect, God, whose word is the true light, and enlightens every man coming into the world, the creator of all things. In the second antinomy, realism versus nominalism, the realism in question signifies the school of Occidental thought which attributes objective reality to general notions now usually designated abstract, but which medieval philosophy designated universalia. Here the realists are in fact extreme idealists. So it's the opposite of the realism of the first antinomy. One can neither embrace idealistic realism or realistic nominalism without reserve, nor dispense with one or the other. For love, which demands realistic nominalism, as well as the intellect, which demands idealistic realism, are structural faculties of human nature. Human nature is realist insofar as thought is concerned, and nominalist insofar as social communion or love is concerned. The problem of the universal, he says, was resolved in the spiritual history of mankind by the fact of the incarnation, where the fundamental universal of the world, the Logos, became Jesus Christ, who is the fundamental particular of the world. The universal of universals, the very principle of intelligibility, the Logos, became the particular of particulars, the very prototype of the personality, Jesus Christ. The Gospel of John portrays the union of the principle of universal knowledge with the being of individual love from heart to heart, the work of divine alchemy, the union of fire with water. Christian Hermeticism can only be knowledge of the universal which is revealed in the particular. There is no controversy between realism and nominalism for the Hermit, in contrast to other philosophical schools throughout time which had great big conflict between those two ideas, as he explains in Meditations on the Tarot. Now the final antinomy, faith versus empirical science. So, needless to say, faith is Christian, empirical science in this antinomy is anti-Christian. He quotes, "For truly I say to you, if you have faith as grain of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move hence to yonder place, and it will move and nothing will be impossible to you." Whereas science takes a grain of hydrogen and releases the energy imprisoned in this grain and reduces the mountain to dust. And he expands on this, also pointing out that many mad people can have great faith belief, great faith confidence, or great faith hope. But the faith which moves mountains cannot be intellectual, nor a personal feeling, no matter how intense. The faith which moves mountains is complete union of man with God, which is why illusion cannot engender faith, and also why miracles are testimonies of truth, operations of divine human magic, acts of the God-man, which always operate in the name of Jesus Christ. Scientific faith, on the other hand, he explains in Antichrist terms as an inversion of the divine name, the tetragrammaton, which is used in black magical incantations, which I won't repeat. He says we must crucify the serpent, the scientific creed, on the cross of religion and science, and the metamorphosis of the serpent will follow. Now, then he gets to the gift of perfect night, where he explains that the spiritual exercise of resolving binaries, thesis and antithesis, is the endeavour which enables us to draw light from darkness. It's the discovery of knowledge which has appeared not only unknown, but as unknowable. Every serious antinomy signifies psychologically the light that I possess is polarised at two poles. Between these two luminous poles there is only darkness. It's from this darkness that the synthesis must be drawn. Fiat lux, let there be light. Truth attained through synthesis is present at a deeper level of consciousness than that of the conscious self. That is, it is found in darkness, from which the rays of light of particular branches of knowledge are emitted. The efforts to solve binaries are excursions into the region of this deeper level of consciousness where contacts with the truth are established. The knowledge and power drawn from this region is the gift of perfect night mentioned in the Kore Kosmou. The hermit is the spiritual image of he who follows this method and exercises the faculty of the gift of black perfection, a method which requires true impartiality. He who seeks a synthesis, that is, true peace, cannot take part in opposing things, as taking sides means to identify with one pole over and above another, dividing communities, dividing people. The hermit cannot embrace any human cause without reserve, nor be opposed to any human cause, being loyal to the truth, which is synthesis and peace. This is why he is condemned to solitude, and why the peacemakers are in the same category as the poor in spirit, those who mourn, who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. They refuse to take sides in the face of partial truth and prejudice, being dedicated to the cause of the whole truth, which unites the world and bears peace to the world. The hermit is the travelling salesman of peace, making his way from opinion to opinion, belief to belief, experience to experience, finding the way of peace between them, unity and diversity. The serious hermeticist is not a neutralist, although he applies himself to the neutralisation of binaries and to the peace of the rainbow or unity and diversity. He knows how to say no to the tendencies aiming at false peace, those of transcendental indifference, subjugation and nihilism, just as he says yes to everything which aims at the true peace of unity and diversity. Yes and no, magical words of the will, its supreme and unique law. Now, Christian hermeticism is heliocentric. This is where he gets a little bit into his chakra teaching towards the end of this Arcanum. By heliocentric, he means he's according the heart a central place in all practices. Ethical hermeticism, a term employed in Russia for spiritual alchemy, aims at transformation of the whole system of chakras into a system of 7 hearts, the humanization of the entire being. Thus, now Tomberg calls it the 8-petaled lotus. That's not correct. This is a 1,000-petal lotus. This, when it's become a heart centre, will cease to be abstract and transcendental, becoming full of warmth as the fire of Pentecost. The 2-petaled lotus will become compassion, filled with insight into the world. The creative world of the 16-petaled lotus will become magical, consoling, healing, illuminating. And then we have the solar plexus, which will become conscience, the 10-petaled lotus. The 6-petaled lotus, the sacral, will be holiness. The 4-petaled, the root chakra, will be an inexhaustible supply of energy and creative elan. Now, the real position of the 8-petaled lotus, we don't actually want to eat bugs. The 8-petaled lotus is actually the Hermit centre, which is just below, to the right of the physical heart. Okay. I even have a picture of this. Can I show you? Which I bought in Sri Lanka. Its colours are pale pink. 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Pale pink and gold. The Hermit centre. This is the secret heart chakra. Hermit. There you go. Okay, so with that, I think it was worth looking a bit deeper at our friend, the Hermit.